Assalamualaikum. I'm going to explain the process of implementation on GST and SST. Let's start with the timeline. GST or Goods and Service Tax was introduced in April 2015 and abolished in June 2018. Then SST, which stands for Sales and Service Tax, was reintroduced in September 2018 and is still in use today. Next is the GST structure. GST was a multi-stage tax applied at every level of the supply chain. It had a standard rate of 6% and covered most goods and services. Businesses that earn more than 500,000 a year had to register, issue tax invoices and submit reports monthly. One key feature of GST was the input tax credit, which allowed businesses to claim back tax they paid on business purchases. This helped avoid double taxation. And then the structure of SST. SST, on the other hand, is a single stage tax. It is made up to two parts: sales tax, which is charged at 5% or 10% to manufacturers and importers, and service tax, which is like 6% and applies to selected services like hotels, food and telecom. Unlike GST, SST does not allow input tax credits, so businesses can claim back the tax they paid. Businesses with turnover above 500,000 must register and file tax return every 2 months. Now, let's compare GST and SST. GST is more effective in tracking taxes because it applies at all stages, and the input tax credit system improves accuracy. It's also more transparent. To sum up, GST is more structured, efficient and transparent, but it was unpopular among the public and seen as a burden. SST is easier to manage and more business friendly, but it is less detailed and can lead to hidden costs. Although many experts and reports believe GST is better for the economy, its return is still being debated in Malaysia.
As for the second question, I will explain the differences between GST and SST. Both are indirect taxes applied on goods and services, but they work very differently. First, GST is a multi-stage tax, which means it is charged at every stage of the supply chain, from manufacturer to retailers, but businesses can claim input tax credit. Meanwhile, SST is a single-stage tax, which tax is only charged once, usually at the manufacturer or service provider level. Second, under SST, multiple tax effects may happen. Since tax become part of the cost at each stage, consumer may end up paying tax on tax. However, GST avoid double taxation because businesses can claim the tax paid on input, making the system fairer. Third, GST is more transparent as tax is clearly shown in the final prices of goods and services. SST is less transparent because the tax is often hidden in the selling price, making it less visible to consumers. Last but not least, the article also mentioned that SST may lead to more compliance issue and potential tax evasion. In contrast, GST helped to improve transparency, making it easier to monitor and reduce tax evasion. In conclusion, based on the Fiscal Outlook report, GST is seen as more effective, more transparent, reduce tax on tax effect, and also help reduce tax evasion. However, SST remain in place despite GST is being praised as the better system.
Hello, I am HAIKHAL. Okay, let's move to question number 3. Determine which tax system yield higher revenue for the government, SST or GST. GST, or Good and Service Tax, is a type of tax that charged at every stage of supply chain, from the manufacturer to the wholesaler to the retailer, all the way to consumer. Because it covers so many stages, the government collects more revenue. More tax transaction means more tax. But here the catch. Since it taxes multiple times, the final price of goods usually goes up. And who end up paying more? First, the consumer. That's why when GST was introduced, a lot of people were unhappy. Price felt higher and it became a burden, especially for lower and middle income groups. So now, let's compare that to SST, the sales and service tax. SST is only charged once, usually at the final sale, when you actually buy the product or service. It's simpler, easier to manage, and it doesn't push price up as much as GST does. Of course, SST doesn't bring in as money for the government, but the public prefer it because it feels less heavy on the wallet. So, in short, GST brings in more money, but feel more expensive. SST is lighter, but earn less. Which one better? Depend on who you ask, the government or the people.
Next, for question D, I will explain how the Sales and Services Tax (SST) and the Goods and Services Tax (GST) affect consumer price with an example from the retail sector. Let's start with SST. SST is a single-stage tax usually applied at the manufacturing or import level. However, it has a multiple effects on consumer price, since tax is charged only once and not shown clearly on receipts. The cost is often hidden within the selling price. This makes it less transparent for consumers and can even lead to double taxation when goods pass through several stages before reaching consumers. Now, let's look at GST. GST is a multi-stage tax charged at every level of the supply chain, from manufacturing to wholesales to retail. But unlike SST, GST allows businesses to claim back input taxes on purchases. This mechanism helps avoid double taxation, and the tax is shown clearly on the receipt. As a result, consumer price became more transparent and predictable. For example, in the retail sector under SST, you might buy a product and not know how much tax you are actually paying, since it's built into the price. But with GST, your receipt shows exactly how much tax you were charged. This builds trust and allows consumers to make a better informed decision. In conclusion, while SST may seem simpler, it can increase the final cost to consumer due to hidden taxes. GST, on the other hand, ensures better transparency and more accurate pricing through input tax credit.
Hi everyone, my name is AZZIM, and today I will be explaining why the Malaysian government continues to implement the SST system even though GST is more effective and efficient. Firstly, the government's decision was largely influenced by public opinion. When GST was introduced in 2015, many Malaysians saw it as a direct cause of rising living costs. Because GST was printed on every receipt, it became a constant reminder of what people had to pay, and this triggered a lot of dissatisfaction and protest. Politically, this became a big issue. During the 2018 general election, one of the winning coalition's main promises was to abolish GST. To stay true to that pledge and regain public trust, the government reintroduced SST. Second, re-implementing GST now would not be simple. It would require retraining government staff, rewriting tax laws, and overhauling IT system, all of which are time-consuming and costly. It could also confuse business and slow down compliance. Currently, the government's focus is more on targeted subsidy reforms and improving tax enforcement, especially through digital platforms. SST is simpler and doesn't stand out as much to consumers, which means people are more likely to continue spending, especially important now that the country is still recovering from the economic effects of COVID-19. So, in conclusion, while GST may be more efficient in theory, SST remains in place to ensure political stability, public satisfaction, and smoother path for economic recovery. That's all. Thank you for listening.